Hey, everybody.
How does time work?
It works. It works when your daughter says, "I want to play with you 5 minutes before you have a presentation." I used every one of those minutes to play with her. So,
Cute. So would anyone like to introduce themselves? Tell us where you're coming from and what brings you in today. Maybe are you in the US? Are you on the other side of the world? Either way, we're happy to have you.
Okay, well, I'll start. My name is David. I've been on a few of these sessions and happy to be here. So I'm coming to, I guess, these talks via idealism, or I guess the latest thinking and idealism that I guess Chalmers, Castrop, a few others have had, and not really polemics, as I know people like to get into here. And anyway, that's it. Hello.
welcome, David. Good to see you again.
Thanks.
Who else wants to introduce themselves?
Hi,
Yeah,
I'm Barbara.
Sorry.
Hi, I'm Barbara. I'm in Florida. I'm from New Jersey. And I might have, you look familiar, Garrett, but I don't remember being at one of these meetings, so I'm not sure what it's all about. Thanks for
Well,
having.
we have a 15-minute social, and then we have a presentation, and then we have a conversation about, the topic. And so that's kind of the format. And so now we're just kind of getting to know each other, and then I'll do a presentation at 7 and then 7 Eastern, and then we'll talk about it, and people explain what they like, what they don't like, what they agree with, what they don't agree with, and we have just kind of a pre-thinking session after the presentation.
Okay, thank
Hey.
you.
Hey,
I'm Andy.
I'm
I'm
sorry.
from Palm Beach, California. And I got pulled over here by Kyle from the Atheist Odyssey. I've been
Great.
here once or twice before.
Good to see
We
you
talked
again,
about
Andrew.
Stoicism, and we talked about something else. I forget now exactly what.
Happy to have you. Hey, Jenny. Hey, Carl.
Hey, how's everyone?
Hi, how are you, Kaya?
Good, good.
Hi, I guess I'll introduce myself. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm Julia. This is my first time at one of these meetings. I did watch the presentation on Stoicism on YouTube before signing on. I'm interested in the subject of time. I'm an artist, and I've been thinking a lot about my work through the vantage of various philosophies on time and scientific conversations. So I thought I'd check this out. Looking forward. Thank you. I'm in New York.
Myself, even though I'm not on camera. Good day to everyone. I'm Robert. Regretfully, I can't say, although I'd love to. I'm from Miami. I'm professor in the Department of Arts and Philosophy. I'm an artist myself, and a theoretical, literary, and visual artist, and inventor through the United States Patent and Trademark Office. I'm really looking forward to the conversation and wish I could say so. I'm going to wish everybody a wonderful conversation. Thank you.
Thanks and welcome. And I'll be interested what the artists think of my perspective on time. I think it's novel, at least to the best of my knowledge it is. And Mary, you have your hand up. Go ahead. Mary L., did you mean to put your hand up? You're on mute if you're talking.
Okay, there, finally, something, a pop-up came up. So I'm Mary in Seattle. There used to be a Seattle analytics philosophy meetup here prior to COVID that met on a regular basis. So we had many interesting topics and lectures, and yours caught my eye. And sorry, that's my timer. The question I have for you is if you have an alternate theory of time other than the one used in relativity, how do you think your time, your concept of time would be integrated into science?
Yeah, so I will answer that, but in general, the questions are probably better for after the presentation. It's not really, I'm not presenting an alternative theory of time to relativity. Like my theory of time includes relativity and it aligns with relativity. It's just that I get a little more clear and go a little bit further and handle some of the philosophical questions around time.
Okay, great, thanks.
Yeah, no problem. Michael, go ahead.
Yes, I'm Michael, New York City. I approach this from a physics perspective rather than philosophy. I would venture to say that nobody knows what time is, including Einstein, who essentially put it on the same footing as a spatial dimension. I'd be curious, to get a heads up from the presenters as to, just the one or two sentence outline of what your contention is. I mean, are you contending that time is discrete or continuous, or what is your perspective?
So I'm going to go through all the attributes of time and describe what I think is the right way of like the right category into which time falls within each of those attributes. But first, I'm going to go through a bunch of theories on time and why I think they're wrong. And then I'll go into like what I think is the right answer. And for those not familiar with A theory and B theory by McTaggart, those are two that I'll address, and then a bunch of other things about you'll see in the agenda, you will get a brief summary of everything I'm going to cover in the agenda. So yeah, I'll give you a summary of what's going to be covered, and then I'll go into each thing in detail.
I have a
Mary, sorry, go ahead.
No, did Mary wanted to go?
Mary, did you still want your hand up, or was that still left over?
I'm taking it down, sorry, thanks.
No worries. Anyone else want to introduce yourself and what interests you in the topic of time?
I just had a question.
My name is Jonathan Mizentsev, and I'm somewhat interested in this topic because, I find time interesting, and I do believe that if you were to somehow solve it, you would probably find a way to resolve a lot of problems in explaining the universe. But so far, it doesn't seem like we have a good enough grasp of time to do that yet. I live in Woodburn, Oregon. You know, I got interested in philosophy a while back. Went to meetings. I guess I went to about 100 meetings, I guess, based on an email I got recently. So yay for me, I guess. But other than that, yeah, not much to talk about me.
Cool. Welcome.
And I'm Charles. I'm from Denver, Colorado. And over the past 10 years, I've read a couple of books on special relativity, so I have a pretty good conceptual understanding of that. As well as I also find it endlessly fascinating, the idea that that time could be discretized. So I am hoping you'll discuss that at some point in the discussion tonight. But yeah.
I will talk about discrete versus continuous. Yeah.
Cool.
I will say that's one area I don't have a definitive answer. I have a hypothesis that I can't fully defend, and I'll be honest when those are the case. The other ones I think I can defend much better than that. But Carl, go ahead.
Yeah, hi everyone. I was just wondering, I'm not too knowledgeable about the science and the philosophy of time, but from my perspective, I always thought that time was kind of an illusion. And I'm wondering if anybody has ever mentioned that
I will cover that tonight. So there's a lot of people saying time is an illusion, and I like to joke that when someone says something is an illusion, they are under the illusion that it's an illusion, and it's most likely actually real. So I will go through all the reasons people think it's an illusion and why I think they're all wrong.
Okay.
So
Perfect.
Cindy, go ahead.
I'm in the Washington, D.C. area, and thank you so much for hosting this event. What inspired me to join was more like the practical perspective on how to think of time. Because when we think we have time, we're not really motivated. But when we feel like we have no time, suddenly time changes. Also, the first meetings that I attended were when the presenter that passed away.
Jeffrey.
And yep. So that was one of the first times when I attended events, and yeah, that's mostly what I wanted to share. Thank you.
He's missed, Jeffrey Caldwell. So yeah, so Cindy, we usually try to focus on practical philosophy at the FTI. Tonight's is mostly more theoretical. I have one practical slide, but I would love to sort of address what you talked about when we get into the conversation. So if you don't mind, raise your hand then and ask it again, because I'll forget by then. But I think that's a great conversation point to talk about. So I want to make sure we cover it tonight, even though it won't be in the slides.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for bringing it up. I usually like to make things practical, but sometimes I get a little philosophical, and on time it's a little philosophical. There are practical pieces, but mostly it's philosophical. Neil, go ahead. Good to see you.
Yeah, this is Neil. I'm from the Philadelphia area, suburbs, not the city. And my interest in time is not necessarily from the relativity side of things, but I have a lot of experience with NTP, which is Network Time Protocol, and converting back and forth to local time from that standard time. So from a computer point of view, I've got some time experience, but I'd like to hear about it from another point of view. I just thought that would be interesting.
Cool. Yeah, I won't be covering NTP type of stuff, but I think you already know that well enough that you don't need any help. So hopefully we'll have something of interest and that helps you learn here. That's part of the goal of the FTI, is to help people learn. I'd argue that's a universal purpose of life. One of the reasons we're all here on Earth is to learn. So anyone else want to introduce themselves?
Oh, yes, thank you.
Yeah, go
I'm
ahead.
Isam from Yokohama City, Japan. The time is very interesting topic to talk about, and I'm so curious about where we are getting to. And our time is different from elephant's time, a little creature mouse time, and time is money, and all kinds of things is based on time. So it's very important to think about. So nice topic. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Konnichiwa.
Konnichiwa. Yes, thank you.
And Maria, I'm going to put you on mute because I think you didn't mean to be talking, and you're not on mute, and there was some background noise. Thanks for doing that. Ludmila.
Yes, hello. My interest in time is because I discovered Waiting for Godot, which is a theatrical piece on waiting. And I was really interested about waiting, how you are vulnerable and powerless in face of time, in face of boredom, in face of like kind of a little death, because you cannot do anything. And I'm writing on that. And I discovered Bergson recently, which is Henri Bergson, who wrote on time, and he separate time and the time of consciousness, which is called the durée, like during. And yes, that's all.
So yeah, Waiting for Godot is a great book. I read that a long time ago. But I would say that we're not powerless in the face of time. Even though we can't choose when we die, you can be sure to live well while you live. And so that's what I try to focus on, is living well while I live, so that I won't fear, or have regrets when I die. And so yeah, my 2 cents there as a quick commentary.
Could I just also add to that?
Yeah.
Play, Waiting for Godot is a fun play. It's a play, really. It's not really a novel.
Yeah.
But just two characters in the entire play. It's quite clever.
Yeah. It was fun. And bonsoir, if I have your accent right. Parlez-vous français?
Oui.
Je know.
Oui,
I'm better
je
at
suis de
Spanish,
Paris.
actually. But hopefully someday I'll learn French. Donka, how are you?
Hi, my name is Donka. I'm from New York City. I'm interested in learning and discussing concepts about time. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
My interest in time, I'm interested in how people perceive time as they age. I'm interested in how a person's focus and attention plays a role in time perception.
That's another one that I'm not going to cover, like perception of time as you age, which I find really interesting. I've thought a lot about, but I didn't cover it in the slides. So let's bring that up if you could in the conversation after the slides, because I think that's really interesting. You know, it's very fascinating how time flattens as you look backwards, and so yeah. Thanks
Got
for
it.
thanks for that comment and question. And by the way, for the folks in New York City, we have in-person New York City events several times a month. So I'll put a link in the chat where you can learn more about that. And if you send me an email, my email will be in the link. I think my email's in the link. No, it's not, but you can find me on Meetup, and you can send me your email and I can invite you. Just tell me you're in New York City and I can invite you to all the New York City events. So,
Sounds awesome.
cool. Be great to see some of you in person. Um,
Sounds
and
good. Thank you.
oh, and David, yes. Thank you for reminding me, David. I'm sorry that I forgot that we were dueling this. So I do you want to go first, David, or do you want to go second?
I can go first, no
Okay,
problem.
I would prefer you go first because once I get talking, I go a long time. So,
Sure.
if you don't mind, but let's let Sunny introduce himself, and then I'll let you present. Let me make you a co-host. So we're co-hosting this event, David and I. And so Sunny, welcome, and tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're coming from, and where you are, and what interests you in time.
Thank you, Garrett. I'm joining from Virginia Beach, Virginia. It's my first time here, and I see a familiar two people, Carl and Kerry from Seattle. Those are the only two folks I know. So my interest is I'm thinking more in terms of the origin of time. How did it all begin, right? So that's my interest. Thank you.
Great, welcome. And I'm going to go ahead and give a quick introduction for the event, if that's okay, David. And then I'll let you introduce yourself. I'll introduce myself, and then you can introduce yourself, and then you can go into the slides. Is that all right?
Sure.
All right, cool. So thanks everybody. You guys introduced yourselves. Now David and I, as the co-hosts, will introduce ourselves. And Kyle, I think, has volunteered to be the moderator. So we'll take you up on that, Kyle, if that's okay. To keep track of time and stuff like that when we get to Q&A. My name's Garrett Lang. I'm a software developer turned software inventor and now entrepreneur. My hobby is writing and discussing practical philosophy, and I'm also the executive director of the Free Thinker Institute, which is the organization that brings you to tonight's event. We're a not-for-profit looking to support and empower members. We really want to help people be the best versions of ourselves, to seek truth and to be fair, which is the first of what we call the 5 intentions, which are things that we should all be intending to do all the time. And we do that through transformational, personal, and professional development. We have free events like this one every Tuesday, covering a wide range of topics not typically covered in academia or industry, at least not widely, and also that usually have practical value, although I mentioned that tonight's has a little less practical value in the presentation that I have, but maybe David's is more practical. Is it more practical, David? No, okay.
Absolutely not.
Sorry. So
Well,
sorry,
almost.
guys. We usually try to keep it practical, but tonight we're getting very theoretical on you. So we also have members only events for people who really want to apply practical wisdom into our daily lives, including the 5 intentions and any other wisdom. We have only one rule in the FTI, and I'll ask everyone to follow it tonight. We always do, and that is to remain polite. I like to say the more you disagree with someone, the more you have to learn by asking them thoughtful questions with empathy and trying to understand where they're coming from, rather than telling them they're wrong and you're right. We really don't learn from doing that. So we learn much more by asking thoughtful questions. And in the Q&A portion, we'll all have the opportunity to ask all of each other thoughtful questions, so we can learn from each other, which is really one of the goals of the FTI, is to help create a community where we learn from each other. I covered all that. And so with that said, I'm going to let David introduce himself, and he's going to present first. And we may go a little over I don't know how long is your presentation, David? Do you know?
I think it can be under 10 minutes.
Oh, well, you're going to be a lot faster than me. So we'll probably be okay between the two of us. So why don't you introduce yourself, and then go ahead and jump into your slides, and you have presentation powers.
Okay, sounds good. Again, for those of you who joined in the last 10 minutes, name is David Schreier. I'm a former computer person, used to be a systems programmer, project manager in financial IT. I also like to work with time from a computer point of view or a network point of view. But lately I'm newly retired. I've been delving into, I guess for the last 10 years, some of the basics of idealism. And this came before I, started scratching with quantum physics, really at a basic level. And some of my original ideas about time fall out of. So I'll try to get into that. And then a number of you actually raised some of these issues with, well, how does time work, personal, psychological time, et cetera, et cetera. So I try to get into that. So without further ado, I'm going to try and present.
Oh, one other logistical thing, please hold questions until after the presentations. And David will present first, then I'll present, and then you can ask either of us questions afterwards. Just let us know who you're asking questions to, and we'll have a little intro to the Q&A portion. But we like to by popular demand, people have asked to let the presenters present to get the whole set of ideas out, and then just write notes for your questions so that you don't forget them, unless you have a better memory than me, and then you'll remember them.
Okay. First of all, can anyone see the slides, or can?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. So the whole idea was, I guess, for me to talk about time travel. What does it mean to travel in time? And I say imaginary view. This is an imaginary view. Okay, so let's make sure the slides work. Pause, share. Try to move the thing. I'm looking for slide controls. That's not working. Oh, it is working. It's just slow. Okay. All right. So one of the so I guess what drives the whole thinking is that I like to think of reality as a subset of our imagination, that reality is actually what we see and feel that others can say, yeah, that's it. And a socialized person is living in reality. What he or she thinks of as reality is something someone else can verify or can validate. And so I have two slides that go into this. One is just if you work with babies, had babies, or have worked and have lived with old people, especially those going through dementia. We have, at least my feeling is, we have nothing but imagination driving what a baby does. And as the baby, born first, second year, I say imagination is descendant, meaning reality is intruded, interactions with other people, and what is commonly thought of as reality. And that is what a socialized individual has, the middle square. And what we frequently see with old people, and I like to highlight dementia as a perfect example, where we say, well, they're leaving reality. In actuality, they're living in less of what we call reality than others, living in their own world. Imagination is then again ascendant. And I'll get into how this affects time in a bit. But that's one view of reality. And then the next is our everyday, what we have. Well, we have reality in the middle, validated by others. Anything that we see and touch is only because we call it real, is because others say it so. On the private side, we have our imagination. I sort of have that to the right. Excuse the cheesy slides. And on the left, we have dreams. And what really drove a lot of what I was thinking was these dreams that we all have are so vivid and so alive that something must be going on, some piece of consciousness or piece of a larger reality is happening that we don't quite have a good handle on. So it's these two pieces, both the way babies and old people behave, as well as our imagination and dreams. I guess to do the slide right, you really have reality inside the imagination. Just moving forward. So when it comes to time, so we have the idea, and I know Garrett's going to get into this quite a bit, past, present, and future, A and B theories. And my contention is we really don't have anything called present. There's really no such thing. And I'll start with the yellow circle. So we know at about, what is it, 0.10 of a second or less. I'm not sure what the actual number is. The order of events is immaterial in the human brain. So we're processing all this stuff in our brain, but it really doesn't matter when it came in at a very short, within a very short window. In a much larger window, I would say, well, we have what we have the past, we have what we think of as the future, but we really just have some sort of neighborhood of what we call the present. And why? Because when things are happening with what you would think of as the present, well, they happened already. And the way we're acting on things is, is not at the same time. So I can't really get into how we're also living in the future at the same time, but the idea is that we are directly interacting with past and even the future. Okay, let's go to the next one. So, and this was touched upon earlier, I think we all have opinions about it, that we have different internal clocks, all of us. And my feeling is, at least the thing I could add to the party is, it seems that some people are living more in the here and now than others. For instance, I would say, I'm never quite here. I'm always either in the past or future, but not always present. And similarly, we could say some people are overly optimistic, thinking about the future, hopefully in a good way, or thinking about dwelling on memories, always living in the past, maybe holding lots of grudges, and they are focused on what I would say is the imaginary rather than the, again, quote unquote, real. So I would say we can perceive of the present as imaginary, or a construct involving the interaction between our consciousness, and that really should be plural, as well as and those of others. And that's what we call the present. And then, given that, it's, if we think of everything as imaginary, it's less difficult to imagine how a past and future would be. So, very simply, time travel to me is we travel to the past via memory and to the future via prediction. Now, I can't, let me get this out of the way. And so the idea is it's that simple. We can construct the past in our imagination, Same thing with the future. We imagine things, and because year by year or year over year, technology is helping us with those immersive experiences, VR, etc., similar to what we already have. I believe, or it's my contention, this will become more vivid over time, over the long haul anyway. And the next bullet is, well, advances in technology blur the distinction between reality and virtual worlds, and this blurring creates indifference as to what's correct. Meaning, reality and imagination, if at some point we could get the same effect from the thoughts in our head versus quote unquote reality, who really cares what's real or not? If the outcome would be the same. And then, go into basically examples, the simulations, virtual reality, the idea of a shared vision of past and future, simply a museum. I don't know who here has been to a World's Fair, but you're living in the future, as is anyone who's wagered or looked at a stock report and bought a stock thinking of its future price. I think that's it, and that is it. So I'm happy to take questions, or other people want to ask later, that's also fine. And close this.
Why don't we, just because you just presented, I think it is good to maybe take 10 or 15 minutes worth of questions now, and then we'll have more time for more questions for you after my presentation. Does that work, David?
Sure.
I will give the caveat, for questions, try to limit please do definitely limit each time you raise your hand to one question or comment of less than 2 or 3 minutes. And Kyle will be our timekeeper. And if someone makes a comment or asks a question that you want to make a quick comment, like a less than 20-second comment, or ask a thoughtful question to understand their perspective better, just speak up after the person talks, and I'm just going to keep track of time, and we'll give it like 10 or 15 minutes to ask questions. I'll put a timer on. So Carl, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I just had a kind of a long lingering question I always had for a while. And I'm wondering, what are your perspectives on that? And I'll ask the same question to you, Garrett, when you're done with yours, which is this idea of losing track of time when you're in flow. This is something that I experience on a daily basis, and almost kind of like when it's time to go to bed, I'm kind of mad that the day went by, and I've always wished we had more time. So I'm wondering, which is why I have this kind of feeling that it is kind of an illusion, because when we are actually, our consciousness is focused on something else, we kind of lose track of time. And so I'm wondering if time is indeed just a conscious thing. And, anyway.
So I think of that, I would say we all have our own personal clocks, and we do get lost in thought. And I would say, just like we could have, or it could be said, we have a shared consciousness, we have a shared time. And, you have a clock that says 5 p.m. that points to a shared agreed time. Yet you get up at a different time in the morning naturally than I do. You have a different speed of life, meaning, your day could be a lot shorter or a lot longer than mine. And I think these are real for, again, humans. I think one of the fellows, Isamu, might have been talking about, what about bugs? What about pets, etc.? We all function at different speeds. So I would say the answer is yes. We have both the individual as well as the group, in the same way we have individual and group consciousness.
Thank you.
Okay, so I have David Didamore is next. So over your hand.
Very good. Thank you, Brother David. Interesting presentation. And I wanted to comment on your statement that the present doesn't exist. I'd like to draw an analogy to a motion picture projector. Those of us are old enough to remember those things from grade school. I think it was like 16 frames a second like that. Go down through the projector and one at a time flashes a picture. And to me, it's something like that, although actually I have to admit it's actually continuous from the future to the present to the past. But obviously the frames that have already projected, go into the memory or whatever. And the future, of course, is always only anticipated and maybe assumed, but there is that frame we're on. And it's what, I'm looking at my window, my consciousness at my windshield of my eyeballs or whatever. And that's what I call reality. Of course, it sometimes is a flawed vision, flawed interpretation, but I wonder if you'd like to comment on that. Thank you.
Sure. So I wouldn't disagree or quarrel with the idea of a projector, but I would say within ourselves, or a movie projector rather, I would say within ourselves and what we think of as the present, there's a whole bunch of movie projectors. There's a whole bunch of processors. And that might be why I'm a little more troubled by pointing to a single present. I know Daniel Dennett, we're sorry to, that he had to leave, but he had the idea of, some movie screen deep inside of us driving consciousness. And if that were the case, then yeah, you would have a present, but I just feel there's too much going on and too many points of view, even within ourselves, to be able to point to one central spot.
I think I can see what you're saying, that I was, commenting about looking out and seeing reality. But yeah, there's emotions going on within me. I have a digestive process going on. And so I understand what you're saying about a lot of different things going on. But yeah, I think I would just comment on reality. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Sure. I have Andrew again.
Yeah, hi.
Hi.
In my head, I see myself going instant through instant through instance cognitively. I mean, my brain is in this instant, then it's in this instant, and then it's in the next instance. And everything else is either a memory or a projection. That's how it feels to me. And even when I'm thinking about this, I'm thinking in words, and I'm pulling the words out of memory after I've said them. And so it just feels like that from a cognitive point of view, I'm just moving through time instant by instant. And that's all there really seems to me. And that everything else is, again, just either a projection or a memory.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I mean, it's not really a question, but it's just kind of, when you said there's no immediate here, it feels like to me that's all there is.
Right. Yeah, that is another way of looking at it. And that the whole thing is a present, and we could bounce around. I mean, there's many ways to put that together, but yeah, I hear you. I hear what you're saying.
I'll add a quick comment. I like to say you can't get stuff done in the past, you can't get it done in the future. So the best time to do everything is right now.
And
Sort
that's
of agreeing with
everything.
Andrew there.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Okay. I have Julia.
Hi, thank you. I guess it's not really a question either, and I'm chiming in on the coattails of people before me here, but I appreciate what you were saying about reality as a shared as an agreement. Our perception, what we agree on to call reality is based on other people agreement from other people, and I appreciate that. But again, this idea, I am definitely in the camp that it is all now, that it is all present, and that how we talk about time and anything to do with a clock or a calendar is is a man-made attribute that's put on top of time, but that time is. And any idea of the present or the past is a function of brain memory. So I'm curious about how you include body sensations, as our friend, sorry, from two ago was commenting also. We have not only our thoughts on time and our idea of time, but we also have our experience sensually in life of being. So I guess that's what I want to offer, because I'm really on this camp of it is all now.
Okay, I mean, I'm not sure if it was a question, but I would say,
No.
The idea of pain comes up all the time. Somebody pricks you with a pin in your arm, so something happens in your arm, and then a couple of milliseconds later, your brain processes it. And the question is, when did that thing happen? And one of, I guess, my issues is, again, all this back and forth going on with processing the pain, realizing that it is pain, realizing that something happened and then calling it pain. What may be going on, and I do hear everyone saying, well, there's really only the here and now. I get that. It's just a question of defining exactly when these things happened. If we had super fast, millionth of a second, or maybe we already do, and we could map everything that's going on in our consciousness to handle that pinprick and our feelings about it and how it changed our lives. I think we might have a tough time zoning in on exactly within the millionth or billionth of a second the darn thing happened. Because that raises a host of other questions. Happened to who? Happened to what? And was the reaction to what happened part of what happened? So I know it's a little nebulous, a little wishy-washy, but anyway, that's my take. But I do hear what you're saying. Okay, so we have Ludmilla. Just look for your hand.
Yes, so it's again a question about reality, and you finished your topic saying who cares what's real or not. So I wanted to ask what can make sure, I hope I don't repeat myself, but what can make sure what is real or not?
Right. I can't personally, and I think just looking at the TV news day in and day out, I think it's clear that many others can't really tell what's real and what isn't. Um, so the feeling I have is, as technology improves, and I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself, we could get to the point where we just don't care. Now, if there is some effort to say, well, this is real and that isn't, I would then say, well, something might be real for you and isn't real for me. And I think that, classic problems of existence, they really do boil down to subjective. That apple is real for you. It's real for me. It might be real for everyone in this group, but to another person who, just for whatever reason, their body cannot process vision, taste, this, that, the apple might as well not exist. So that's the problem I have with reality. It works only for consumers of that reality.
Okay.
Okay, I have
I
Mary.
just mentioned that I put in the chat. Her question was, how do you know what's reality? And I put in the chat a link to a document that has the FTI's 5 intentions, which I would argue is the best way to know what is reality. And then in my question, I'll try to say that I think there is a reality and why, but I'll let you go.
Hi. So these kinds of conversations are fairly confusing to me and confused. So what would you tell a child about time to make it a useful concept? Because the concept of time, as you would explain it to a child, would be different than the concept of time used scientifically. And so there are some big contextual issues that inform how we're using the word time. And so apart from that comment, so isn't it a little nihilistic to suggest that there is no reality, noting that we really have difficulty with using language similarly in this conversation? For example, I find your use of the term travel to be metaphorical. One travels. Well, what do we mean by travel, for example? Because you certainly can, quote unquote, move yourself emotionally from one place to the other through your use of your biological capability with your quote unquote mind or your consciousness or your brain. So what do you think? Are you being a little bit nihilistic to say that ultimately reality wouldn't matter?
Short answer is yes, and I don't really like it. I mean, I don't like the fact that one can take these views and twist and build all sorts of nonsense or ways of living that are not very nice. So yeah, unfortunately, these ideas are somewhat nihilistic. In response to your I guess what you said about how you would talk to a child about it, I wouldn't change a thing. I mean, I have raised 2 boys. They do know what time is, I think. And this is again more in I guess a philosophical realm. It's very hard, at least I find, to translate this stuff into day-to-day action. So in terms of your the comments about, well, is your traveling metaphorical? Well, that's a toughie because there are many who could say, well, real travel, getting on a plane, going to Europe, coming back, that travel was also just as metaphorical. Why? Well, because all of Earth is really just a projection of a flat screen elsewhere by bits, and we're just traveling within the bits in some ways we don't understand. So I would be I am not as wedded to commonly thought of, I guess, ideas about physical distance, physical time, etc., except I do live in the real world. But when it comes to philosophy, I try to throw that away. And I know that's, it's not a recipe for good living.
By the way, Ludmilla, if you don't mind, I'm going to ask you to hold your question until after my presentation, and then we'll let Michael ask one more question, and then I'm going to move on to my presentation, if that's all right.
Okay, I think we have Michael. Yeah.
Yeah, just 2 quick points, one on reality and one on time. Reality is our response, our sensory response to the environment, and that has to vary from species to species, or even from person to person. There's a lot going on in the universe of which we're not aware. We didn't become aware of radio waves, for example, until 150 years ago. But that is a reality. The other thing about time, I think much of this conversation boils down to whether or not time is discrete or continuous. When we talk about the difference between past, present, and future, there can't be a present unless time is discrete. Now, we know from quantum physics that energy and matter do come in discrete packets, but we do not know. There's a supposition that time is also discrete at what's called the Planck level, but there's no empirical evidence for that. So this is the crux of the problem, whether or not time is continuous or discrete. That's all.
Thanks, Michael. I am going to cover that. And I will actually be curious to hear more from you about why you think that it's the crux of the situation, because I kind of viewed it the opposite, to be honest. So I kind of want to hear, more about why you think it's the crux of the situation after my presentation. So that said, hopefully you guys can see my slides now. And let me get people's, for those few in bold, I like to have the video up. Nice to see people on video, by the way. So, all right, I have a big agenda. I'm gonna try to cover this as quickly as I can. I'm going to talk a little bit about how classical mechanics viewed time for historical purposes. Then I'll talk about special and general relativity. Was there a start to time? Will there be an end to time? I'll try to address that. Is time an illusion? I'll address all the arguments I'm aware of, the major arguments that I'm aware of about why people think time is an illusion, and I'll try to debunk them. I'll talk about the A and B theories of time and why I don't think either one of them is an accurate depiction of time on its own. And then I'll introduce what I call C theory of time, which I believe is an accurate depiction of time, talking about time as not one dimension, but two dimensions, both the fourth and the fifth dimension. And then I'll describe C theory across all the significant attributes of time. And I'll talk about how C theory can explain why quantum entanglement has what seems to be faster than light information travel. And then I'll give a little bit of practical wisdom. So I did say there will be something practical tonight. And then I added a slide for a bunch of questions that people have asked that I didn't cover. And I don't think David covered either. And so I'll try to give quick answers to those questions. And then we'll get into Q&A again. So a quick thing on my background, I got an A in honors physics at Cornell, which has a top global physics program, and we covered special relativity there. So I do have background in doing the mathematics of special relativity and showing how special relativity affects like size and time dilation and all that kind of stuff. So classical mechanics is basically absolute time. Newton is the guy famous for sort of coming up with time is absolute, flows uniformly, unaffected by the state of motion of the observer or objects being observed. And he says that time is independent of the objects and universal across the entire universe. It's linear and moves in only one direction across a continuum. And basically mathematically we talk about time as like a function as x of t is where x is the position at time t. And synchronization and simultaneity, in classical mechanics it's assumed that clocks in different locations can be perfectly synchronized, and whatever happens they will stay in sync essentially as long as one isn't broken. We've proven through experimentation that that is not true, and I'll address that and how C theory can account for that. There's also I'll get to that. So independence from space, time is considered a separate entity from space in classical mechanics, whereas general relativity looks at time, changing in sort of the warping of four-dimensional space. And so that's where time and space are interwoven in the way that gravity affects time. And then at low velocities, like throwing a baseball, this perspective of time is pretty accurate, right? If you're traveling near speed of light, this perspective of time is not so accurate. At what I would call low speeds, which is everything we experience here on Earth, this classical mechanics view is pretty, pretty on point. And so a lot of what we're talking about today is theoretical for that reason, because at high acceleration rates, they did an experiment where there were two atomic clocks that were synchronized. One was put on a plane, flown around the world, and it basically, general relativity showed the prediction of how time would go slower on the plane that was flying, and it was validated by an experiment. And I have the reference to the experiment in the slide notes, which I'll share the slides after the presentation, probably in the chat, but also in the Discord community in the reference channel. So special and general relativity come in, and it says, well, as you accelerate, really, and a lot of people say it's as you move faster, but you have to accelerate to move faster. But people often talk about time dilation being a function of velocity, like how fast something is moving. It's actually not really as accurate to use that, and it never felt intuitive to me, because let's say you have the twin experiment where you have two twins on Earth, and one goes half of a light year away and half of a light year back. What ends up happening is 8,000 years pass on Earth, but only 1 year passes for the guy who went on the spaceship. But here's the thing, if it was all about velocity, and you think of the two different frames of reference, the guy on Earth could have been going, light speed velocity away from the guy on the jet. So it really doesn't make sense that velocity is the key there. It should be acceleration. And actually, the serious physicists use acceleration as the formula, which I have a little arrow pointing down. The serious physicists find that the predictions are actually more accurate when you use acceleration. Probably velocity is generally, if you take your frames with an assumption of what's moving is what's the velocity of what's moving as what's accelerating, then they end up being approximations of each other. But the acceleration is the more accurate of the two, which fit more with my intuition. And I learned about in researching this presentation, to be honest. I had an intuitive sense that acceleration was the key, but I learned that it was actually true from the research. So did time start at the Big Bang? So, this is the current prevailing theory, is that time started at the Big Bang. For those that came to my presentation on the origins of the universe, you know that I don't agree with that. Because let's assume that for a moment that it's true. What did the universe look like before the first moment in time, and how did that first moment in time come about? If you read the arguments from physicists on these things, they're not very logically convincing for someone that applies critical thinking to the theories. Like, I haven't heard any good plausible explanation for how a first moment in time could come about, because everything that we experience happens over time. And so without time, there's no like sense of transformation. Time is how we see things change, and without any ability to change, things change over time, and without any ability to change, how can you even have a first anything? Because nothing can move. So that said, scientists like to say that asking about what the universe was like before time doesn't even make sense to ask. But for me, that's kind of an escapism. It's like religious people, when you ask them a tough question and they don't know the answer to, and they go, well, that's just how God wanted it. And I don't, I love the wisdom of religions, and I learn from all religions that I've come into contact with, but I don't like those kinds of answers. I like good logical answers for things, and some people have them and some people don't. And in this case, I don't think scientists have a good logical answer for how the first moment in time came. And I would argue that's because it never did. I think time is infinite and has always existed. And so if you want to hear more about why I think that, you can watch the recording on the origins of the universe, which I don't know if it's up on YouTube yet, but if it's not and you want it, ping me and I'll try to accelerate getting it up there. And then basically the hypothesis is that there are an infinite number of Big Bangs, and they all interact with each other eventually in a cycle of expansion and contraction of mass energy from Big Bangs, and then it creates a supermassive black hole, and then it gets destabilized again and then blows up. So that said, if that's true, time is infinite, and there is no heat death to the universe or big crunch. And if we play our cards right, humanity can exist infinitely, as long as we don't destroy ourselves before we get to interstellar travel, which right now we're on that course, and I'm hoping that we can all do our part to try to get us off of that course. So that said, is time an illusion? So I'm going to go through the various reasons that people think time is an illusion. In Einstein's theory of relativity, because time isn't absolute, and time isn't happening simultaneously for different observers, people will say that this suggests that time is an illusion. And I would argue that that's kind of like throwing the baby out for the bathwater. It's like, this doesn't fit my current theory on time, and so I'm just going to throw out the theory of time completely. And I would argue there is a better explanation. It's the two-dimensional hypothesis that I'm presenting tonight for the first time. And so I think that relativity of simultaneity is not a good reason to think that time is an illusion. The next is the block universe theory, and according to that, the block universe is where past and present are fixed, and future events are past, present, and future events are equally real, and time does not flow, but it actually exists in a four-dimensional block. And so it suggests that the future is real and already exists, and therefore our movement through time is really an illusion because we're just kind of traversing this thing that exists. It's like, you know, I guess I don't see why even like, and if anyone has a better explanation for why that seems like a defensible reason that time is an illusion, I would love to hear it. But for me, that's not very convincing, because even if the future exists, the past exists, and the present exists, and they're all real, our perception that we're moving through time still is as real as anything that we perceive as real. And so, I don't see how that defends that time traversal is an illusion. For quantum mechanics, some interpretations of quantum mechanics, like the Wheeler-DeWitt equation, don't include time as a fundamental component. This led people to say time might emerge from more fundamental timeless processes, and say that time is not a basic constituent of reality, but a derived concept. Now, I would say even if time emerges from something else, that doesn't mean that it's an illusion. It just means that it emerged from something else, but it's still very real. That said, I think my hypothesis that time is an actual set of dimensions, two dimensions, says that it kind of takes away this argument and aligns really well with quantum mechanics, quite frankly. I don't see this holding water after my presentation, but even without that, I don't think that it's a great argument. Now, there's also thermodynamics and the arrow of time. The second law of thermodynamics says that the concept of time basically always moves things from lower entropy to higher entropy, which is like chaos, and that it's a fundamental law of, and that and basically it says that if fundamental laws of physics are time symmetric, meaning they can go backwards and forwards in time, then the directionality of time could be an emergent property rather than a fundamental aspect of reality. However, this law of thermodynamics is only valid on a closed system. And what is a closed system? It means a system that doesn't interact with anything outside the system. But what closed system is there? Now, if the hypothesis on the origins of the universe is right, that the Big Bang is all that there is and there's nothing more beyond it, theoretically our entire invisible universe is a closed system because there's nothing beyond it that impacts it. But if my hypothesis that the universe is infinite is right, there is no such thing as a closed system. Everything is interacting with everything else, and gravity from infinite objects across an infinite universe are all interacting with each one of us right now at this very moment. So that said, I don't find the thermodynamics argument super convincing either. And in summary, like I said before, when someone says our intuition is, I changed the quote a little bit here. When someone says our intuition is an illusion, they're under the illusion that it's an illusion. In other words, our intuition is usually right. So that said, intuition isn't always right, but I would argue it's pretty solid. That said, and do feel free to keep your hands up, but I'm going to answer the questions at the end of the presentation so I can present everything together, and then we'll be able to take all the questions and allow people to make comments. If people can fill in gaps where I don't follow the arguments, I'm very honest about what I understand and what I don't. Some of like the things that I said, I'm not clear on why someone would find that argument convincing. If someone has a more convincing explanation for it, I tried my best to represent it well, but maybe I didn't. And I'm very open to being wrong. I like to say when you admit you're wrong with good judgment, you're immediately right again. You're just more right than you were before. The only time you're actually truly wrong is when it's clear that you're wrong and you refuse to admit it. So never feel bad about admitting you're wrong. So is time emergent from motion? I've heard this from a lot of people. I can give a simple thought experiment, which I put in the chat, but maybe people didn't notice it. I don't always have time to watch the chat when I'm presenting. I don't see it at all. And basically imagine that there's a piece of mass energy in the corner of the universe at 0 degrees Kelvin with no motion. If something nearby, let's say we leave it there for 100 years, and then we come back after 100 years and we give it a little energy, and now it starts moving again. Well, that object had to have existed over those 100 years. So time must have passed for that object because the object was there for 100 years, and it was there 100 years ago when it wasn't moving at all, and then it was 100 years later after we started making it move. So the object was there during that 100 years because it existed the whole time. So time must have passed for it. So I don't see how, I understand why people think that motion is, a part of time because, all of what we see as change happens over time and through motion. So again, for practical purposes, like I said, Newtonians, Newton's concept of time is perfectly good for throwing a baseball or even, lots of other stuff, maybe not launching a rocket, quite frankly, but most things that we do on daily life, Newtonian time is fine. But when it comes to like the actual fundamental nature of time, I don't think it's emergent from motion. So let me talk about the A theory of time. It posits that there's a universal present moment, and basically that there's past, present, and future, and that the past and present are real. The future is not yet determined, which is very intuitive, right? We sort of see that, the future hasn't happened yet. The past has happened. We can observe, we feel like we have this present moment where we can take action. So that's very intuitive. The problem is that it posits that the present moment is universal, which really has a lot of challenge from special relativity, where the present moment is different for someone moving at the speed of light or near the speed of light versus someone who's stationary. The present moment for those two people will be distinct. And so the A theory is really not it's super intuitive, but it's not easily defended in light of scientific advancements around special and general relativity. So intuitive, but doesn't jive with known science. B theory is counterintuitive and jives with known science, and I'll explain what I mean by that. It's also called the growing block theory. It says that the past, present, and future are all real and already decided. Like, now the future might, it does still allow for the possibility of non-deterministic free will, but that's where the many worlds theory, but that the future, already exists. And it posits that our perception of the passage of time is an illusion. You already know I'm not a big fan of that hypothesis. But basically, it doesn't seem, because of all of the reasons that I said, I don't think that the passage of time is an illusion. I don't see how you can really defend that. And the B theory basically talks about events happening relative to each other. And so the way that it refers to time is not as, this is the past, this is the present, this is the future. It says this thing happened before that thing. Thing A happened before thing B, and thing B happened before thing C. And so you can basically create a a bunch of dependencies that fits with special and general relativity using the B theory of time. But I don't think that the idea that time is an illusion is defensible, as I already kind of covered. So I'm going to introduce what I call the C theory of time, which uses objective time as the fourth dimension, possibly, and I haven't come to a firm conclusion on this, but possibly where the objective scale of time is specific to a single point in three-dimensional space. And that takes a little bit of noodling to get your head around, but I can describe it more in the Q&A if it's not clear. I don't actually think it's necessary. I think you can actually have a universal objective time. But once you add the fifth dimension, which is the passage of time, the rate of passage of time. And so but it's been a long time since I did my special and relativity math. And so if I were more fluent with my mathematical historical capabilities, I would have done some math for this, but I didn't try because it would have taken me a long time, more time than I had. Originally, I'm not sure whether or not that objective time range has to be specific to each point in three space, but either way, the idea is you're moving from one objective time dimension to another if it is specific to each point in three space. And so your perception on the objective scale can be different because you're on a new objective measuring stick every time you move to a different point in three space. Now, the fifth dimension of time is the rate of passage of time. And so what this is like, let's say, I'm going to show a diagram for this in a little bit, but basically, which will hopefully make it clearer. But basically, the passage through the fifth dimension of time is normally at a steep diagonal where things are, moving slowly. And then the faster you move, the less diagonal, the more straight that you're moving through that fifth dimension, which is a little weird and takes a little getting used to. But I think the diagram that I have in a few slides will explain this more clearly, where I describe the twin paradox using the fourth and fifth dimension. So the way that I like to think of it is we're kind of like falling through the fourth dimension of time, but you can think that different objects fall at different rates. A feather's going to fall slowly, and a brick is going to fall fast, right? And they do fall at different rates because of wind resistance, but in the case of time travel, it's not because of wind resistance, it's because of acceleration. And so acceleration is the determinant of how fast you travel through the fifth dimension in time, and at what angle. So I'm going to go through the twin paradox for those not familiar with it. Let's suppose you have two twins on Earth, and one travels at, nearly the speed of light for what they experience as a year, half a year out, half a year back. 7,071 years have passed on Earth, which means that the rate at which time travels on Earth varies by object and depending on the acceleration of the object. But that also means that there is a time scale on which the two twins reunite. And so there is some, reuniting of and realignment of the time scales after the different rate of passage of time happens. And so there is, it's not like everything is just disconnected and doesn't connect back with each other. And that's where the fourth dimension is that reunited, objective time that feels intuitive to us. The fifth dimension is the rate at which time passes, which is the not so intuitive, but I think makes more mathematical sense and aligns with special and general relativity. So this is the diagram. So, I'm going to take my mouse here. So if you take the fourth dimension is universal time, and in the fifth dimension, you have a near straight line. I drew it as straight, but this would be not exactly straight. It would be straight if you were traveling at exactly light speed, but it would be like a slightly bent, line. And then this one is like the guy on Earth who probably dies very shortly into the 3,500 years, unless they get really good at medical care very quickly, because we're not doing so hot right now. The trip out, 3,500 years pass, and then the trip back, 3,500 years pass. And so you're moving further in that fifth dimension, which means more time passes because you're traveling further. And then if you're traveling near the speed of light, time moves as fast as you can. So this is the person in the state of flow. This is the person who's miserable and bored out of their mind. So sorry, I'm just going little joke comparing to what we talked about before, how time flies when you're having fun. So that said, let's talk about the attributes of time and what the different options are and what C theory says about each one to make it a more complete theory. So for the direction of time, there's the thermodynamic arrow that I talked about, which I don't think is very useful because I don't think there are closed systems. There's the cosmological answer, which is about the universe expanding. And so, time is, moving in the direction of like time is moving because the universe is expanding. And then there's the causal area, which is cause precedes effect. And that's also called the principle of sufficient reason, which I believe is well defended. Cause and effect. There are people who try to challenge it, but I'd argue it's pretty tough to find a flaw with cause and effect. What people don't realize is that cause and effect don't have to be deterministic all the time. Just because some cause happen and some effect happen, the relationship between cause and effect don't have to be deterministic. And in fact, if my argument defending free will is right, they're not deterministic all the time for self-defining properties or entities, I call them. So that said, then we'll talk about relativity, where time is relative and can vary depending on the observer's velocity. Actually, like I said, I think acceleration is the more accurate way to compare it. And in the presence of gravitational fields in general relativity, that's described. And so while I do think time is relative, in the twin paradox, you can have an objective fourth dimension time that unites the two twins, but as they're traveling at a different rate through that fifth dimension. And so theoretically, well, I covered that already. So time dilation, time can pass at different rates depending on relative speeds, which is special relativity, or gravitational potential, which is general relativity. And basically me introducing the fifth dimension as, which by the way, contradicts my prior presentation for those that came and is now on YouTube, and I'm gonna have to redo it because I did a presentation on higher dimensions and I didn't have the fifth dimension there. I didn't come up with the idea that there should be a fifth dimension of like that includes time until I studied for this presentation. And so I'm going to have to revise the higher dimensions argument, but I think the rest of it stands fairly well. I just have to add a second time dimension and I'll have to think more about it in my introvert time. But that said, having the fifth dimension as the rate of passage of time explains time dilation and how time can, the rate of passage of time can change from objects based on their perspective and based on the acceleration of the object. Now, tense is, like whether or not you use past, present, or future, which is the A series, or tenseless, which is comparisons of time. And I think only in C series can you actually use both of these simultaneously and have it make sense. And so C series is the only one that really fits with both intuition and with modern science of special and general relativity. Because you can say that basically the past if you're hopefully that makes sense. If not, ask me questions about it. I'll get into it in more detail. I want to try to get to the Q&A because I'm taking longer than I would like. So continuity and discreteness was brought up earlier as a big thing. I did not find like a lot of implications, but sometimes something that you don't think has implications turns out to have them. I never thought free will had big implications, and then the more I delved into it, the more I realized it did have big implications. So I may have been missing something, but basically Planck length was brought up. And Planck length, for those that don't know, is basically the smallest currently believed to be length of space or of mass energy is considered a Planck length, which is a really, really small dimension. Millimeter got nothing on Planck length. So, and the time that it takes light in a vacuum to travel the distance of one Planck length is considered to be the smallest unit of time that's measurable. Now, for all practical purposes, that really is continuous, in my opinion, because it's so, so small that we have nothing that gets even close to measuring, Planck lengths of time right now. We can measure attoseconds, but that's still a really big amount of time compared to a Planck length. So I would hypothesize, just based on intuition, that someday we could build measurement tools that are so small they can measure units that are smaller than Planck length and also measure the passage of time in smaller distances than Planck length. And the reason I say that is because if you think about the atom, right? At one point, science said the atom is the absolute smallest thing in the universe. There's nothing smaller. And that's, the concept of the smallest unit of block of anything came up in ancient Greece, where they came up with the term atom, but it wasn't until modern science discovered what we now call the atom that they said, okay, now we found the smallest thing in the universe. Well, then lo and behold, we had subatomic particles, and we found a lot of subatomic particles, and boom, there were smaller things than the atom. And I see that as a constant, moving the goalpost, but in a legitimate way, if I can make that comment. It's like what we think is the end is never really the end. We've got further to go. And because of that, I'm hypothesizing without a lot more than intuition, and I'll say I have a low degree of certainty that this is true, that 100 years from now, there will be a new smallest, and 100 years from then, there will be a newer smallest, and then it'll keep getting smaller. And the thought experiment that I have for that is, imagine that you build a robot that can build a robot 1/10 of its size, including making the precision of the smaller robot, 10 times more precise. Well, build that robot, 100 times, and suddenly you have something smaller than a Planck length. I think a Planck length is like a power of 37 or something like that, if I'm remembering right. And so if you do it 38 or 39 times from a very small robot, or maybe 40 times as safe, then, and I might be getting the exact, numbers wrong, but I could see creating something that was ridiculously small. Now, I didn't do a ton of research as to why the Planck length is the smallest length possible. So someone may feel free to correct me if there is some really good, strong, solid scientific evidence that science will never, a million years from now, discover anything smaller than a Planck length, possibly. But I have no problem being wrong there, because I didn't research it carefully. So, ontological status, there's presentism, which is that only the present moment is real. There's eternalism, where past, present, and future are all equally real. And then there's the growing block universe, which is the past and present are real, but the future is not. The C theory series considers the past real and fixed and unchangeable, but it's unchangeable. The present is real, and you can take action in the present. And then the future is not yet determined, but has probabilistic likelihoods, which is really an ontological Bayesian approach. I did an event on epistemology, and I talked about why I'm a Bayesian epistemologist. I, deal in terms of probabilities, not definitive yeses and nos when talking about the future. I think David said it well, that the future, when you're looking at it, is about prediction, right? Like, how well can I predict what's going to happen? And we make our best predictions, and we put our cards down, and we make our bets, and then we see whether or not we were right, and then hopefully we learn from that if we were wrong. So quantum entanglement and C theory. What is quantum entanglement? It's when two subatomic particles have the same attribute, like, for example, spin of an electron, which is an attribute of an electron. And if you change the spin of one, it instantaneously, faster than the speed of light, changes at the quantum entangled other electron. Now, particles have been entangled as far out as a satellite, which is about 1,200 kilometers. So this is not only a short distance type of thing, entanglement, and we're getting, it was fairly recent that that was done, and so we'll probably get further and further with entanglement. It seems to violate the idea that nothing can travel faster than the speed of light because the particles are responding instantaneously. But I would argue that my hypothesis for this is that the quantum entangled particles actually share a space on the fourth and fifth dimensional, like those attributes are shared on the fourth and fifth dimensional spaces. And so when one changes, they're changing simultaneously because they are like connected in a higher dimension sort of way, if that makes sense. So it's really they're part of the same sixth dimensional object, meaning they have the same position in the fourth and fifth dimensions. And so passage of time is instantaneous because they're at the same place in the fifth dimension. So how people talked about time travel. I like to give my hypothesis on how time travel is possible without a paradox. So first, let's talk about the paradox. What if I go back in time? I have a time travel device. I go back in time and I kill my grandfather. How could I have ever come about if I killed my grandfather? Then my parents weren't ever born, and so I couldn't have existed in the first place. So how could I have killed my grandfather, right? And that seems to be a paradox. Well, in the many worlds theory of reality, there are an infinite number of parallel universes. So the solution to this paradox, which I haven't heard anyone else present, but this is my presentation of it, is that if I go back in time and kill my grandfather, I'm killing the version of my grandfather in a parallel dimension, because when you travel in time, you're actually traveling to a parallel dimension. And me, the time traveler, is me from another parallel dimension, and the me in the parallel dimension I travel to is never born. And so there's only one me in that version of that parallel dimension. Whereas if I go to that parallel dimension and I travel back to when my grandfather was and I just shake his hand and say that was cool and I still let him live his life, I could still be born, and then there's two of me in that parallel dimension. So theoretically, with the many worlds hypothesis, you actually can have time travel without a paradox. That said, I have no strong belief on whether or not this is 100% theoretical and has no practical value argument, but I thought it was fun, so I thought I'd share it. Really nothing more than that. So now for the practical wisdom of the day. Remember I said the past is unchangeable. So, trying to change it is a totally fruitless effort. And so don't try to change the past. You can't, it's not possible, but you can learn from it. And I think that the two values of the past are, one, to learn from past mistakes or past successes and just learn whatever you can from the past, until you're getting diminishing returns, in which case, focus on the present. And then two is to rejoice in pleasant memories and reminisce. And I think those are two good things to do with the past. Things that are not good are beating yourself up and saying, why did I, make that mistake? And I'm a horrible person because I made that mistake. Just learn from the mistake and don't do it again. If you made a mistake, say, look, I'm not going to do that again. Commit to yourself, be firm in it, and don't make the same mistake again. Or try your best. And I like to say, don't stress, just do your best and accept the rest. So do your best to not make that mistake again. And if you've done your best, you can't do better. Also consider being a member of the FTI, where we try to help each other achieve our life's goals in a more quick and efficient manner, and help each other learn from the past and present, and consider learning more about us. I'll put the link in the chat again after the presentation. And then I have a little summary here of the C theory of time and like how it applies to everything. And then I have a couple of other things that I just wrote down notes when people were asking questions about how people perceive time as they age. As I get older, time kind of compresses as I look backwards, and it always seems like the same amount of past, but I have more years to cover. And it's only when I get prompts where I have notes or pictures or things like that that bring the past back to life again, because I just have more things to remember and only the same amount of brain to remember it. And so I also like to say that time is the opportunity to get wiser. Some of us take advantage of it and others don't. And that's where I recommend everybody do try to learn from the past. Next is when you're in a state of flow, that time travels faster. And when things are not going well, time feels like it's traveling slow. I would argue that there's actually a practical reason for that. When things are not going well, we have more to learn. And so we get more of a hyper focus on what's going on, because our psyche is giving us more attention, focus to attention that we don't like what's going on and we should probably change things. And so it feels like things slow down and they give us more of a chance to think about how can we change things to get to a better place. And so I would argue that's a good thing, but we shouldn't just give up if things are not going well. We should think about what we need to change our environment so we can get back into a state of flow. And one of the courses that I teach for members is how to achieve your life's goals in a state of positive flow so you can be in a state of flow all the time. And when things are going well, it's okay to kind of zoom along because things are going well and you're learning and you're growing and you're developing. And, that's a good thing. That means you're in a good space. You're not wasting time when you're in a state of flow. And then is reality consensus driven? And for that, I have a thought experiment. I don't think it is consensus driven. And say that there are 3 philosophers in front of a closed door, and 2 of them say the door doesn't exist, and they try to walk through it. And then you know the answer to that. They hurt their heads. And reality bends its will, truth bends its will to no person. Truth and reality are eternal, and fighting against them is like trying to fight the rising tide. You're not going to win. So it's better to align with truth, and that's part of what we do in the FTI with the 5 intentions. And with that said, I would love to know whether or not this was helpful, whether or not anyone learned anything, and we'll take all kinds of questions, comments. By the way, you don't have to ask a question. You can also make a comment of just like, here's my opinion and offer your opinion. Like, doesn't have to be a question for me or for David. And questions are fair game. Questions and comments are fair game for both me and David at this point. So that said, Jonathan's had his hand up and I've seen a bunch of facial expressions that he strongly disagrees with me. So I want to empathize with him and see where he's coming from. So Jonathan, go ahead.
It's not really strong disagreement, more like at least when I'm talking about B theory of time, the main reason people who subscribe to B theory of time is that you could simplify a lot of things with it in some ways. For instance, if you just have a bunch of eternally static images and it's just a finite sets, you can say beginning, even though technically that's pointless term because again, all events equally exist beginning and then end. You could just say, okay, the heat death of the universe is the end of the finite sets. The beginning set is the Big Bang, and that's it. That's all time. And since they're all eternally static images and analogous to an eternally static image, they couldn't have a cause and effect. So cause and effect is essentially an illusion because something internally unchanging couldn't affect another thing. The reason why every event seems to cause another is because something to do with our memory and our perception of a thing, kind of like a apparent motion in cartoons where it seems like it's one object moving but in reality it's just a bunch of frames. And if that's how reality works, then you can fairly say that our perception of it is the perception of an emotion is an illusion because it's analogous to cartoon characters moving, but they're not really moving. It's just a bunch of tiny frames that move quickly. But and this also solves other problems. Like if there's no cause and effect and everything's essentially static set of things that's eternally there, then you don't have to make this whole giant explanation of where or when anything comes to be because well they're always there. So there's no need to explain anything further. That's the explanation. But of course,
We have this perception that time is passing. So if time is only an illusion, why do we even have the perception time is passing?
I think I sort of explain it. The apparent I guess I have to show a link of what an apparent motion is.
If you explained it, I didn't follow the argument.
An optical illusion in which stationary objects viewed in quick succession in relation to moving objects appear to be in motion.
Right, but that's all time is motion through another dimension. So, if you're saying that time is, multiple snapshots of reality that we're experiencing one after another, that is the way that time is described intuitively by people.
Well, no, because the issue is that if time is really just a bunch of static images, then there's no such thing as one self. It's just a bunch of selves that think they're one because there's no moving object. So it's just a bunch of Jonathans, basically. If you were to have Jonathan A and Jonathan B and Jonathan C, they all appear to be one Jonathan because they all have the memory of the other. They have a copy of the memory of the other one, but they can't be the same person. Because again, it's just a bunch of static things that's eternally there. So since they're all just snapshots, they're not really one person. It's just the illusion of one person.
But then you're entirely denying your existence of a sense of self. So you're saying that Descartes was wrong that he thinks and therefore he is.
Well,
Descartes doesn't
no,
really even exist.
no, a set of selves is not the same as rejecting oneself. It's just that you're rejecting the illusion of oneself. There's just a bunch of different selves. There's still consciousness, there's still thoughts. It's just that the person is thinking they're the same person as the other one, even though they're not.
I'd love to continue this conversation in Discord if you're open to it, but I want to let other people ask questions because there are a lot of hands up. So, Carl, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks, Garrett, for this very scientific presentation. I actually did learn some things, so thank you for that. I think I learned that I'm on the C series school of thought, I guess, even though
Nice.
it's wrong. At least that feels the one that fits my thing. I still think that time is an illusion only because of this idea that we lose track of time. So when you say if it's an illusion, we wouldn't perceive reality, but we do not perceive time when we are in flow, right? And this idea of time flies when you're having fun, right? And so we don't perceive reality. And so the fact that we don't perceive it kind of tells me that it is strictly a perception and therefore an illusion. It also makes me think, do animals or bugs have the same concept of time? Do they feel like time? Like my intuition tells me that animals feel like they're always in the present, that they don't thinking about the past or the future unless they have mammalian brains like elephants and dolphins who have memories and stuff like that. But what I wanted to ask you though, on the slide that you have about debunking time as an illusion, and when you get to that slide, I was like, okay, here we go. And I saw my thing in there about psychological perception, but I'm not sure if you covered it because it seemed like you went from one and then you went to quantum theory and you bypassed the psychological perception. So did I lose track of time there, or did you
No, I
cover it?
didn't cover the psychological perception very much. Like I only had it on my last slide and it was a last minute add-on based on people's
Okay.
questions. When I was researching, I have to admit I saw the psychological perceptions and I didn't dive into them. I think probably because I was so short on time. Like I spent 4 or 5 hours researching, but I'm just didn't have time to go into
And
the
ironically, that's the one that I really wanted to get your perspective on. So do
Yeah,
you have
sorry. But
do you have it
let's
or
talk
not?
about it. I haven't given it enough thought, but so why don't we continue that in Discord if you're open to it, and then I'll be able to do research intermittently, like as we talk about it. So jump into Discord and say ask some questions about psychological perspective of time. I just won't have like you if you have specific questions about it. I'm happy to try to do the best I can on the fly, but I also think it would be fun to do it on Discord and continue the conversation there.
And I just had two last thoughts. One is that this idea of the time travel paradox and the grandfather thing. As far as I know, that's been covered in a couple of films really very well. One was Back to the Future, with this idea that he's trying to, if he doesn't get his parents together, he will not exist, and he starts to disappear from the pictures.
Right.
At the time. So this idea that, and then Looper, if you've seen Looper.
But that's basically talking about how the twin paradox is a paradox. I'm talking about how it's not a paradox.
Right. But in the sense that it isn't,
But you're
because
right. You're right. That kind of is
yeah.
Maybe that does cover it.
And
Yeah.
and like in Looper, if you remember, I don't want to give it away, but basically, if you kill in the past, you disappear from the future instantly. So
Right.
that covers the paradox. So, and then the
Yeah.
last thing I wanted to say was, there's a joke I think attributed to Einstein. He said like how long a minute is depends on which side of the bathroom door you're standing in.
Yes, and that's why I say like, if time feels like it's going slow, you probably have to figure out how to change things. Like change is your friend at that point, because if time feels like it's going slow, something's not working right. And I do want to remind everyone, and Carl, I think you're great, but one comment or question at a time when you raise your hand, because we have
Oh,
a
yeah,
lot
no,
of hands up.
sorry.
So yeah, no problem. So Michael asks,
Yes, where do I begin?
where you want to.
Well, with all respect, much of what I hear at these types of discussions parallels how 20th century and 21st century physics has devolved to the point where it utterly confuses mathematical analysis with physical reality. As far as we know, as far as anybody knows, there are only 3 dimensions. Now, in an equation or on a graph, you can call time a 4th dimension, but time is conceptually different from the 3 spatial dimensions. You brought Garrett, you brought up a 5th dimension, the movement of time. I don't see how you can just arbitrarily equate these things as one and the same thing. Mathematically, you can, but mathematics is a human invention that attempts in some way to explain to our type of brain what we perceive to be going on in the universe. And even I don't think Einstein intended it to equate time and spatial dimension. The effects of special relativity really have, in the end, really have to do with the finite velocity of light, the finite speed of light, and the consequent time delay that gives the appearance of time dilation and spatial dimension change. So I'm just curious what your response would be when I object to bringing in more than 3 dimensions in any discussion, because mathematically you may be able to equate them. It doesn't mean that they're conceptually the same thing.
So one point of contention, you said you didn't think Einstein referred to the 4th dimension. He did when he introduced the theory of general relativity, he introduced time as the 4th dimension. So he did explicitly do that and talk about the curvature of space-time and how time is inherently linked to space because of gravity. Now, that's still contested, and the quantum mechanics camps don't necessarily agree with that, but it was introduced by Einstein. I guess what I'm having trouble understanding is, it sounds like you're saying you can see and perceive 3 dimensions clearly, and so that's all you want to allow into the conversation, but you do also see 3 dimensions changing over time, and mathematically, you're saying that time as the 4th dimension might make sense mathematically. It might be predictive. It might be useful. It might be a useful model for understanding things, but you still don't like time as the 4th dimension or any dimensions over 3. I'm just curious why the aversion to it, if it is useful and it does make sense and the math does work and it is predictive. What's the hesitation in higher dimensions?
Well, the problem is that we're equating math with physics, and they're 2 different things. Now, whether it's special relativity, where you have time dilation and spatial contraction, or general relativity, where you have the so-called curvature of space-time. To me, that's all stuff on a graph. That's not what's happening physically.
Yeah.
All of these effects can be ascribed to the finite speed of light. The fact that you don't have instantaneous communication. Now, entanglement, of course, is a whole separate thing. And that's because entanglement is not a mechanism for communication. Entanglement is you've got 2 particles that are part of the same system. So they're not even communicating with each other. They are the same system, and that's why a measurement of one automatically determines the measurement of the other one. But
Yeah,
this
but
thing about spatial contraction and special relativity and space-time curvature, I object to the term space-time, but space-time curvature is what happens on a graph. It's not what is happening in the real universe. That's my belief.
so
And I
the
know
curvature.
I'm in a minority. I'm in a
Yeah,
minority.
don't worry. I'm in a minority on a lot of stuff too. And what you're saying resonates a lot with me in many ways. I would, though, instead of pointing to what I presented tonight as the example of being guilty, because I didn't present any math tonight. I just talked about abstractly that I think these things are higher dimensions. I didn't come to that conclusion by math. I came to it from intuition, and putting puzzle pieces together intuitively, the same way that James Clerk Maxwell put together puzzle pieces to come up with the fundamental ideas around electricity and magnetism. He started with fundamental observations and then put together a hypothesis which created predictive power, which was then later validated through complex math. Now, what you say that resonates is that equating math with physics, if you look at string theory, I think that's what they did. They basically came up with really complex math. They created higher dimensions that have no logical or intuitive sense or basis in reality, and they tried to pass it off as physics, and really it was just math. And I don't think it has any basis in reality. And if you read their descriptions of higher dimensions, they don't make any sense. You may actually like my presentation. It's on YouTube on higher dimensions, and I go through, although you'll notice that the second time dimension is not present there, but I try to make a very logical connection between higher dimensions and what we see and observe. It's not a mathematically derived set of higher dimensions. It's more of a logically derived set of higher dimensions. Does that make sense?
Yes, and I think, Garrett, you've hit the nail on the head. What Maxwell did was combine four different equations that were based on empirical evidence. He combined them into a wave equation, but the wave equation also bore out in reality.
Yeah.
That it predicted the speed of light. What
Right.
string theory makes predictions that have never been tested and probably cannot be tested. So you're right, it's math, it's not physics.
Right.
But even much of the interpretation of quantum physics, of 20th century physics, and I have particularly the Copenhagen interpretation, which I think is crazy about probability. And you mentioned that you believe in free will, so you probably accept that the Copenhagen interpretation. There have been more modern interpretations, more specifically Bohmian mechanics, which is a completely deterministic interpretation of quantum physics, and that would dispel any belief in free will. I mean, if you believe in cause and effect, and I believe in cause and unique effect, this whole thing about probability outcomes is completely off the wall. It has to do with an incorrect solution to Schrodinger's equation and an incorrect interpretation, which has been corrected. Again, more specifically by Bohmian mechanics.
So I think you're conflating cause and effect and deterministic cause and effect, which I touched on lightly, but I would encourage you to keep in mind that it's possible that you can have cause and effect, but non-deterministic cause and effect. And I would encourage you to watch the presentation that I gave on free will. I don't have time tonight. We have a ton of hands up, so I want to keep going. I'm going to try to move quicker. But I want to make sure everyone feels heard and that I'm listening to people. And yet I also want to get to everybody's questions. So I get torn on whether or not to respond to what someone's saying or go to the next person. So, because I want to do both at the same time, and I haven't figured out how to time travel yet. So I can't get past 9 o'clock 3 times. So that said, Remco, good to see you, my friend. How are you?
Excuse me. Hi, Garrett. And, well, an interesting presentation, but you know, left a lot of. Excuse me. I should have talked earlier. Well, I have a bit of a cough. First of all, Michael or S, I was putting my hand up saying, I felt like putting my hand up and saying, yes, yes, yes. But then he ended up falling into the same trap as many others do. And that is talking about, well, no evidence or the multiple dimensions, but when talking about entanglement, it's because they're in the same, quote, system. Now, is a system more meritorious than a dimension? And look, it's not a poke at Michael. Yeah, and you know, it's more a question that we don't trap ourselves in all these models. And you did that today, Garrett. You picked on relativity theory, and everything was based on a theory that's a century old. In my view, is no more valid, more better reasoned, more accurate than Newton's theory. Because you see, we're dealing with something which is, dealing with space-time that nobody has, what is space-time? It's something out there, but we can't see it. It works. It produces a remarkably accurate results. But the outcome is that we're dealing with a universe that's 95% dark. I'm talking about dark matter and dark stuff. And, you know, we've got to be open to the fact that Einstein's theory is just a hypothesis and will go the same way as Newton's theory. And with that, a whole argument about time will go the same way. And, you know, and rather than sort of making hollow assertions as I'm doing, remember, oh, by the way, Einstein was never given a Nobel Prize for his general relativity, and because there was another person, Henri Bergson. Now, we haven't talked about Henri Bergson. He made some very profound statements about time, and they're still valid. You know, just because relativity theory is more useful, that we can, you know, we have it managing our phones with our GPS and everything. Don't ignore it. And what about Carlo Rovelli? He wrote a whole book on this. He's a quantum physicist, a current one, talking in his order of time, and he talks about time as just an illusion. Why ignore that? Why, you know, I mean, there's so many issues. Look, that I felt uncomfortable, and I've spent a fair bit of time dwelling on this topic. And quite frankly, I'm confused. I can't make a rational, confident statement about time. You know, I mean, what the hell is it? I don't know. It seems to be, in Carlo's term, an expression of change. No change, no time. He calls it an illusion. He also suggests that it depends on how we focus. And he goes through an explanation of that. So here's a man, a quantum physicist, prepared to sort of question the whole basis of our model. So I don't think we need to be careful. We don't seduce ourselves with these mathematical models that seem to work. Oh, not to seem, they work, yes, work to a point, as did Newton's theory. And I think time is still an open question. And when I woke up half an hour and a bit ago, I had no sense of time.
Try to
When I
finish your
slept.
thought.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, no, that was it. Yeah. So more fuzziness, more questions than anything substantial. Thank you, Garrett.
No problem. I will say, Remco, when you say Newtonian physics is just as good as special and general relativity, GPS, some things that you can't get right without general and special relativity, GPS technology, particle accelerators, nuclear reactions, high energy astrophysics, muon lifetime experiments, and electromagnetic forces, all really, you know, with high speed circuits with electromagnetic forces, all basically require the precision that special and general relativity have. And so Newtonian physics is just completely insufficient as a predictive model for all of those areas. So, you know, Newtonian physics works for a lot of stuff. And actually, I was wrong about missiles. Missiles, it's fine. It's actually close enough to use Newtonian about missiles. They're not quite fast enough, but all the areas that I just gave examples of, you need special and general relativity to be accurate.
yeah, it's better calculated, but I'm sitting in a hailstorm right now, so it's been hard for me to hear.
No worries.
Sorry.
Thanks,
But
thanks, Remco.
clear. I'm very aware of Einstein's theory, and like you, I've done physics. But like I say, it has its own assumptions, just like in Newton. There is no necessary ether. There is a lot of other things, but it's still based on an assumption, and it's a best fit. That's what you can say. It's a best fit.
Yeah, that's all we're doing is we're getting better and better fits over time, and we still have a lot to learn. So that said, Andrew, go ahead. You're on mute, Andrew.
Yeah, just real quick. So I think, time is also affected by gravity. Gravity, I think, can be construed as an acceleration of some type.
Yes.
So I can see where time and space and is actually there's a connection between all of them, that they actually exist together as dimensions or something. I mean, there's certainly a cause and effect there. With the twin paradox, I'm not quite sure how to put it all together, but not only do you have an acceleration, but you also have a negative acceleration. And then you come to a 0 point, turn around, and you have an acceleration and then a negative acceleration. So I'm not sure how that all plays out in terms of the twin paradox. And the last thing I wanted to kind of throw out was you mentioned something about absolute zero and that there was time even before that and everything. But and again, I'm outside my pay grade, so I'm going to just say some things that I've heard and that I kind of understand, but I'm not sure that. So Planck is saying that that energy is proportional to frequency. And relativity is saying that energy is proportional to mass. And so that means mass and frequency and energy are all kind of equivalent in a sense. And so if you have no, at absolute zero, you have no molecular motion, you have no frequency, no mass, basically.
You have mass.
And
You have no energy at absolute zero.
Right, no energy, but energy is equivalent to frequency, and frequency is equivalent to mass. So I think at that point, you've got some kind of a weirdness going on because you've got.
No, I can explain that. So mass
Okay,
energy is the term used for what you're describing is that you can get this translation between mass, energy, and frequency. We always talked about it in my physics class about between mass and energy. So I don't know exactly how frequency plays in, but between mass and energy, you can have 100% energy, which is a photon, and then you can have something that's 0 degrees Kelvin, which is 100% mass. But it's not like one disappears if it's 100% of one or the other. But then with kinetic motion, you're changing from, a certain amount of mass to giving a little bit more energy out into the world because it's moving. You're now turning into kinetic energy. And so you can like have this scale of like 100% mass to 100% energy and everything in between. And mass energy is the quantification or the term used for sort of the universal substance of stuff that can be mass, energy, or any combination thereof.
Right. Well, this was something that Penrose was talking about when he was talking about how the Planck equation is equating energy to frequency, and Einstein is energy to mass, and so therefore they're all kind of connected at that area.
Yeah,
and
they are.
And so frequency and mass, frequency is a clock,
right?
And so if you have no frequency, you have no clock. So, I mean, I'm not sure where to put all that. I'm not trying to make a statement about something. This is just something that struck me as when you were talking about absolute zero, it seems to me there's kind of a weirdness at absolute zero because you stop having frequency, and without frequency, you don't really have a clock anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't. I know the translation between mass and energy, but I'm not sure how frequency fits into it. So I'd have to look more into that. But I think that would be a good thing to continue in the online community about, and I'll do more research about how frequency fits into it, and we can talk about it there if you're up for that.
Right. And one real quick thing, I want to plug a book that I read decades and decades ago called The Man Who Folded Himself.
Mm-hmm.
And he talks about time kind of the way you do, where you can go back and change things, but it branches off into a new area. It's a fascinating book. It's complicated and it's fun to read. I had to read it 3 or 4 times to understand it.
Cool.
But it's really well worth reading. I put it in the chat if anybody's interested.
Cool. Thanks for doing that. Terry, how are you? And thanks for your questions, Andrew, and the conversation.
I am doing quite well. I'm going to try to keep this super brief. Okay, first, my understanding of math is it's just a notation of observed relationships, right? Having said that, nature doesn't care what we think about it. That, on the other hand, as far as this idea of multiple snapshots, creating illusory time, I don't see how you can have the appearance of continuity without continuity. Put another way, where is our illusory self living if each of these snapshot is disambiguated and not connected somehow? Right? Okay.
They are interconnected. It's just that they're not connected causally. There's no causal events going on. It's just the illusion
Then
of
there's no
causality.
continuity. Anyway,
well,
you can reply later, my friend. I've got limited time here. I'm trying to be fast. Okay. When somebody asks the question, what is X? I think a first question is, what would be an acceptable answer to the question? Because when we ask what is time, what the hell do you want for an answer? We need to talk about first. And then finally, Garrett, your discussion, or the portion of your discussion about entanglement indicating that there is a place where there is no space, I think is absolutely on the right path. And I'm surprised I don't hear more discussion about that. It reminds me of the idea of subspace in Star Trek, where they can do these communications at a distance and whatnot. But yeah, clearly, if there's instantaneous change over distance, you can take distance out of the equation. And I'm not sure where that is. Maybe it's the same place where, all the calculations or the percentages are kept about when isotopes decide to decay, or the electron shell decides to make a jump after we throw energy into it. I don't know. But anyway, all right, there's my 2 minutes. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Kerry. And I'm going to give you a small slap on the wrist, even though I love everything you said. Try to stick to one topic so that we can talk about it, only because I can't respond to all of that with all these hands up. But thank you for your kind words as well. But I have to be fair, so that's why I gave you a polite slap on the wrist, even though I loved everything you said. And I really especially liked when we ask what is X, we need a bar for what X is, because that's kind of my argument to the people who say time is an illusion, reality is an illusion, everything's an illusion, I'm an illusion, we're all illusions. I mean, like, what does it take to convince
Illusion
reality?
is not the same as non-existence. Illusion is a wrong sense, in the sense that your senses are interpreted wrong. You're perceiving the thing wrongly. It's not the same as non-existence.
Right, but then you would have to show that we're perceiving it wrong, you'd have to explain what the right perception is and why we have it wrong and why another perception is right. Do you see what I
Well,
mean?
of
That's where
course.
Carrie was saying that you need a bar for what is the right answer. If you're going to say everyone on Earth's perception of time passing is wrong, then you have to say, well, here's the right way to see how time is passing. Does that make sense?
Well, of course it makes sense, but I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I don't think there's going to be an ultimate answer anytime soon about what time is, but I'm just defending the B theory of time because it's not like if it turns out to be true, it would solve some problems because you don't have to explain where the universe came to be because well, if all events are eternally static, it means it's always there. It's just that there's the illusion of change, and that's all we have to explain.
Thanks, Carrie. Thanks, Jonathan. Mike, go ahead.
Okay, I'll also try to be really brief. I wish I had your talent for making a physically meaningful model, but I kind of live in the mathematics, And all these things are, when you get the wrong answer, you keep adding more terms to the Taylor series and you get it corrected and you make the model a little more useful, but it creates some problems. Plato's comment of the map is not the territory says the model is not the territory. And so the models are all wrong, but they still can be useful. We talk about, they've dropped a lot of names. David Bohm is a hero of mine too, not just Michael S. The other Michael S. Feynman is a hero of mine. Rovelli, who Van Sant and Remco mentioned, is a hero of mine. The concept that they're saying is space-time is doomed. All of them have said space-time is doomed. Now, one of the things that goes on that solves the problem of entropy doesn't say, it creates some other problems, and I don't totally understand it physically yet. They talk about something called PT symmetry, parity time symmetry. And that says, that has a situation that when you break the egg, make an omelet, playing the tape backward isn't going to put that omelet back in the eggshell. All the king's horses and all the king's men can't put Humpty Dumpty together again. So we do have that problem with the model. What Carl Rovelli has described is that Schrodinger's wave equation and probably a whole bunch of other equations, including Maxwell's equation, is if you consider space, no time, space and time space is a complex number. And so time is orthogonal to each of the dimensions. And Schrodinger's wave equation becomes a simple diffusion equation. So does Maxwell's equation. And it explains a lot of things. And in Rovelli's notation, and maybe in Bohm's equation without using the construct of pilot waves. So, and then the eigenvalues are complex numbers, and then everything supposedly comes out. Now, I don't understand enough of anything I've heard today to be able to put that together into physical realization. I need to watch some of your movies and probably watch some of Carl Rovelli's tapes again and read his book again, Helgoland book in particular.
I'm in the middle of a summary of Helgoland right now, so
okay, well, you could explain it to me, and then maybe I'll be able to explain it back to you. So
that sounds like a plan. Let's do it in the online community in Discord. By the way, Feynman was not against space-time. He actually used space-time in his research. Rovelli is, but Rovelli says time is an illusion, and I'm not a big fan of that perspective. So, but
Rovelli, Feynman used space-time, and I use space-time, and I use Maxwell's equations. But I still, and I use Taylor series, and I add enough terms to the Taylor series to make the answer come out sensible. And that doesn't mean that Feynman necessarily agreed with it. He probably agreed more with Plato that everything we do works, but it may not be what's going on physically under the covers.
Great. Thanks, Mike. Julia.
Hi, this is all like really awesome. Thank you. I want to offer one thing before I ask my question, which is it occurs to me that it could be useful if we distinguish existence from perception and distinguish existence from time. And when we talk about this idea of time space and the creation of time in the creation of space and the contraction of that we don't need a point of origin if we can accept existence as separate. That's in my little brain, and that concept of time and space is really what's been moving me as an artist. But my question is related to what I was saying before and listening and taking in some of the things that have happened. And somebody was saying there's no time without change. And I guess it occurs to me more like there's no change without time, and the term of continuity that somebody was using. And when I said it is all now, my question is that when I really go deep, it has to be bigger than just an instant, because I can hold a thought, or as a dancer, I can hold an entire movement and complete it. And that's bigger than the instant. But it all is part of my experience of now. And it's because I can hold the whole sentence in my experience of now. So I guess the question is, like, how do we determine that? I mean, maybe you'd have to agree first, but it's like, can the moment, that can the present be bigger than an instant?
Yeah, I think it can, right? Because like if you're dealing with a really complex problem, you're taking into account many facets of that problem. If you're a computer programmer, a number of people have talked about tonight, and you're writing a piece of code, right? You're thinking about all the different ways that that code interacts with other parts of the code. Just like if you're thinking about a mathematical equation, you're thinking about the way that the different parts of the mathematical equation interact with each other. And I really like what you said, that there's no time, instead of there's no time without change, there's no change without time. And that's kind of where I was going with that. I don't think there could have been an origin to time, because if there's no change without time, how could the first moment of time have come about? That would require change, and change can't happen without time passing. So it's sort of, the very presence of time means that it has to be infinite, because there couldn't have been a beginning to it, and I don't think there will be an end to it either. But I don't know if that helps Julia or not.
I have a response, but I think I'm supposed to pass the buck.
You can respond.
I guess it goes back to my first statement of existence as separate from time, and that we could embrace the idea of actually what you just said occurs to me as linear, and that time is always moving in one direction. And if I embrace the idea of this expansion collapsion of the universe, space-time, and I also accept that existence can be eternal, then time can not stop and start, but has, the movement forward and backwards. And there can be a zero that you pass through, but it still exists.
Yeah, the arrow of time is meant to say that time moves in only one direction. Now, theoretically, the time travel concept means that maybe people can move backwards, but that's very theoretical at this point. Like, there have been articles that I've read that try to claim that time is traveling backwards, but when I read those articles in detail and I look for the three assumptions, one of which is false, they're choosing the one that I think is the least likely to be wrong, meaning that time only moves in one direction. And so I don't think there's good evidence yet that time can move backwards, but maybe someday we'll find it. Who knows?
Thank you.
So Murad, thank you, Julia. Murad, go ahead.
Hello. If I promise to be both precise and concise, can I have two questions?
Can you raise your hand one more time for the second one, and that way we can talk about the first one first and then the second one second?
Later, fine.
And we're actually almost at 9, so I see why you're asking. Yeah.
Well, let me start, and then I guess we'll see. So my first question is that we spent to me, it was a surprisingly small amount of time on the question of what time is. There was a lot of discussion about the properties of time and how time can be one dimensions or two dimensions, the C theory and so forth. And I think the question, so I'm going to end that first question by saying that the recurrent topic of whether time is an illusion cannot really be answered without tackling directly the question of what time is, until you tell me what are these the necessary attributes of time is, and I cannot tell you whether that creature actually exists in reality, right? It's not an illusion. It's something that has a physical objective presence. So that's the first point. And I think that this could have also been a discussion about what time is, which I think is slightly different with a different focus. You could start by saying, you know, how do we know time exists? What are the assumed properties of time that people seem to, you know, convey to people the sense that they understand what time is? What are the, you know, things that are considered self-evident about time? And then are they really, and so forth? What are the smallest number of attributes that something, a concept like time has to have for it to be useful, and so forth? So maybe that's an interesting discussion in the future. So that's my first question.
Yeah, so I like that. When you first started talking, I thought that I did answer what time is by creating all the attributes of time and saying what I think, you know, time is across all those attributes. But then, you know, after that, I thought really, for me, time is by definition a dimension across which, you know, we intuitively perceive changes happening to the three-dimensional world that we live in. Time is the explanation for why things change, you know, from one thing to another, from one situation to another. And when you define it that way, and I think that's a great point, we probably should have started with that definition, then it can't be an illusion, right? Because it's our perception, and the perception is reality, and therefore it's not an illusion unless things don't actually change.
Right. But, yeah, but then you but in a way you could have sort of put a brighter light on that because
Yes,
so you're
I
saying
agree.
one of the attributes of time is that it is something that allows us to observe change, but then at some point in your presentation you said that actually time is not about motion, i.e. change, because it is very possible for objects to experience no change for a very long time, and it still should experience the passage of time, which so you alluded to that as well, which I think is an easily resolvable conflict here. But nonetheless, you know, it's like
Yeah, I think it's resolvable. Like, it just means that time is the opportunity for change, not always change being a necessity. It's the opportunity for change. So
it might be a necessity. I think the way to resolve your concern is to say that the time is not every object in your view might have its own rate of change of time, but it does not have its own time. So if something has to be changing somewhere for time to take place, otherwise perhaps there is no time.
guys, I only have time for one more question, so I'm going to let Vera go. I don't think she's spoken yet. And so Vera would love to hear from you. And then I have to put my kids to bed. So
Hi, thank you, Garrett. I want to say excellent presentations, by the way. Don't worry, I wrote out what I'm going to say just to make it quick. Yeah, I'm in my late 30s actually, and I haven't learned about physics since I was in elementary school, and that was just gravity, the basics of that. So to me, this was like learning a different language. My head was like spinning, but don't worry, it's in a good way. And I want to mention, because someone else mentioned about animals and bugs with time. I love dogs and animals, so I browsed the subject of how they perceive time differently than humans. And I read that it has to do with whether they're a predator or a prey animal, and among other factors. So I left a link in the chat if anyone's interested, but there's a lot of articles on that subject with animals, bugs, and that kind of thing with time. So, but thank you all very much. Excellent presentations. Thank you.
thank you, and kudos to you for letting your head spin and enjoying it. I think, you know, one of the you know, I did a presentation on the meaning of life, and I'd argue the very meaning of life is learning, and learning both knowledge and wisdom. So, you know, it's great to revisit topics we haven't visited in a while. And you know, that I would argue is part of what gives meaning to life, and it also increases our sphere of influence, because the more knowledge we have, the more solid foundation for wisdom we have, because we understand reality better. And that's why I think sometimes these theoretical discussions really have practical value. And so, you know, I try to focus most of my time on practical stuff, but sometimes the theory is fun and useful. And like I said, when I did my essay on free will, I thought that it had no practical value at all. And then I later learned some of the implications actually did have a lot of practical value. So So anyway, I just want to thank everybody for coming. Want to invite everybody to come back next week. You'll see wherever you found this, you'll see the event for next week posted as well. I believe next week is a Socrates Cafe. Carl, is that right?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, if it's June 4th, yeah.
Yeah, it's June 4th. So Carl's going to be hosting a Socrates Cafe. I'm going to be in and out that night, but I have a conflict 7:30 to 8:30, so I won't be here during kind of the middle portion, but I'll be trying to pop in where I can. And but I want to thank everybody for coming, for the great comments, thoughts, questions. Want to invite everybody to join us in the online community with Discord. If you go to freethinkerinstitute.org, there will be a link to it there. And hope to see everybody back next week, and look forward to hearing more great questions and thoughts from you all on whatever topic we discuss next week. It'll be decided by popular opinion.
We'll be talking
Thank
about
you, Garrett.
why Socrates thought that time was an illusion, actually.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks a lot, everybody. Have a great night.
Awesome. Thank you. Have a
Thank
good night,
you.
everyone.
Bye-bye.